Axios Local is bringing smart brevity to a city near you. Local will deliver scoops, offer sharp insights, and curate the best local reporting. Our events, called Smart Take, will help readers better understand the most consequential news unfolding in their own backyards. With Local, we focus on what matters in your community.
Welcome to our Axios Detroit virtual event, The Next Steps in the EV Transition. I'm Joanne Muller, transportation correspondent for Axios, and I'm coming to you today from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter at Axios and hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague, Axios Detroit reporter Joe Guillen, and we'll explore the next steps in the EV transition and how consumers, automakers, and local leaders can really work together to get more EVs on the road. Our first guest today is the Congresswoman from Michigan's 12th Congressional District, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who joins us today from Detroit. Congresswoman, welcome to Axios.
Joanne, it's great to be with you. And actually, I'm in Ann Arbor.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're talking today about electric vehicles, and I have to say I've been thinking about getting one, but I have a couple of reservations still. What about you?
Well, I'm on a waiting list for the F-150 Lightning. We'll see if I actually end up getting it, but I think it's got a lot of potential. Everybody loves thinking about me driving around in the truck. But I do think the electric vehicles are the vehicles of the future, and we're seeing more and more product and more options come on the market for people to choose. And hopefully they're going to become more affordable as we see more mass production of them.
Well, that's true. I mean, we're hearing so much about them. Certainly car makers are all in on electric vehicles. They're spending billions and billions of dollars. The question is the consumer ready? And I think there's a few issues. Let's start with charging. The federal government has made about $5 billion available to start for the states to start putting EV chargers along highways. I'm curious, do you think we're spending the money in the right way? Should we be putting chargers on the highways rather than in cities?
So, Joanne, can I sort of give you my approach to EVs, which is the three
Absolutely.
buckets in order for them to be, to actually become popular with the American driver. One is they got to be affordable, which we've been working on in many different ways. That we've had a tax credit. We now have a new tax credit that's going to encourage jobs in America, and also making sure we're not increasing our dependency upon China, but lessening our dependence. The second bucket is batteries. We've got to invest in R&D so that we have the battery that's got people are going to be able to go as far as they want without needing to charge. So it's going to need to have more range than just urban range or driving each day. And we've got to make sure we're not dependent on other countries. We've got to develop the capability here to mine the minerals that we're going to need for those batteries. And the third is the infrastructure, which has three components. One is that we've got to build out the infrastructure, and it needs to be on both highways and in urban settings. And that's happening through a variety of ways. Two, we got to upgrade our power grid so that it can handle it. And three, we got to make sure that people's homes are outfitted to be able to charge the vehicles overnight, which is it's a less cost time to charge those vehicles. And what do people do that don't have garages, that don't have an ability to charge at home? Where are we putting those stations? So all of those are issues that are being addressed, have to be addressed. The money we put in the infrastructure bill, each state has come up with their own plans as to how to develop that. It's now DOT has approved those, and the states have got to have plans that address both the highways in their states, but also addresses the issue of where do they charge for daily life.
Well, what you've described is a very big agenda, I think, to make EVs, comfortable and realistic for people. Let's talk first. You mentioned the affordability issue. There has been some changes in the way that tax credits are allotted, and what's interesting is that the way the rules are written, very few vehicles right now will qualify for that purchase tax credit. And I'm wondering if you are okay with how that bill turned out, and really whether you or other people from Congress can work with the Treasury Department on how those credits, the rules around those credits will be applied going forward.
So it's complicated. And I think that one of the things that Senator Manchin was trying to do when he got this compromise and worked it out was that we were not going to increase our dependency on China, but decrease it. And the fact of the matter is that approximately 80% of the minerals that are being used in batteries right now are coming from China, and we need to incentivize the development of those minerals in our own country, look at different ways like refining lithium and others to be able to do that. So in the first next couple of years before 2024, and it gets very complicated and probably too complicated to do on a quick thing like this, but 40%, you get a 40% of the overall tax credit if the mineral isn't developed here in China by 2025. Well, they're different requirements, but it's complicated. The fact of the matter is it's more complicated than the old one was, but it's going to incentivize manufacturers to build the capability in this country, and it's going to bring jobs back to this country. When I toured the auto show with President Biden, GM showed him a vehicle on the floor that was $30,000, which is comparable to the cost of what other vehicles are right now that all the manufacturers are making, foreign or the domestic OEMs. So as we begin to get into more mass production, costs are going to come down as well. So I think we all know affordability is an issue. I think the tax credit's going to scale up as we are scaling up more mass production and more people buying them. And I'm hoping that we're going to create more jobs here. Vehicles are going to be more affordable, and the time frame that's in that bill is a realistic time frame to build capability here in the United States.
Well, the kind of industrial policy that is behind that bill is something we haven't seen a ton of in the United States. Other countries, China and Europe, certainly have really made EV production a priority. And so now it sounds like, the U.S. is doing that. On the other hand, we're very far behind, and virtually none of the batteries come from, or the raw materials come from the United States. So we have a lot of work to do there. Do you worry that we're getting ahead of ourselves, perhaps? Can we build out that supply chain fast enough to meet the rate at which car makers are pivoting to electric vehicles?
Well, I believe that we're going to, and we have no choice. You just talked about it. We are in a global competitive race. And I'm very proud of where I come from. I come from Michigan. I was born in Detroit, worked for the auto industry, as people know, for 3 decades. But this area put the world on wheels. And I want Michigan to lead innovation and technology for mobility. I want the United States to lead that. And that means we have to do what we are doing right now. You are correct that both Europe and China are way ahead of us on this. And we need to stay at the forefront of this. This is where we need to go. Global climate is real. And quite frankly, you aren't pushing the OEMs. They're now in a competitive race against each other because they see that this is where the marketplace is going. So what we've tried to do in this legislation is to incentivize and to give grants that are going to help us stay competitive and that are also going to bring jobs home. I think something that happened, we outsourced our supply chain and very few people realized what we were doing. The pandemic, as we suddenly realized how dependent we were on China for basic things like masks and gowns, how much of our medicine is being made there, that it's not only an economic security issue, it's a national security issue. And I want to keep this country safe. I don't want to be dependent on other countries. You've seen the world and some of the challenges we're facing, even in the Russia-Ukraine war. We need to bring that supply chain back home. And that's what we're trying to do in this legislation. I think it's targeted at the right issues and that everybody working together. And everybody did come together on this. It was a lot. People have no idea how many tough discussions occurred as this bill was, some people, progressives, thought they're trying to kill this. They don't want it to happen. And other people were worried. We all came together because this is where the future has got to go.
All right. I do want to return to the issue of charging, though. You touched on it a little bit. Affordability and access to charging are big issues for people with electric vehicles. And, there's really an equity issue here. Certain neighborhoods don't have any chargers at all. What can you do about that? What can Congress do about that in terms of policy?
Well, and we have to work with local and state governments to do that. And I am totally aware of how critical this is. And it is an equity issue. Right now, electric vehicles are a luxury vehicle for too many people, and too many people every day. And it's how are you, I worry about how you make sure that even people who have their own garages or have their own homes are going to install chargers that are going to be safe. The first fire we have is going to impact people's confidence. But then you've really got to worry about, there are a lot of people that don't have a garage. There are a lot of people that are living that in housing, multi-unit housing that are in garages. We have to be intentional about that, about putting up charging stations. And some of this is being done private. You're in Ann Arbor, I'm glad to take you to some shopping centers that have installed this so people can charge while they're in the grocery store or someplace else. But this is going to require very intentional public policy with both the private and public sector working together to establish this.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the grid. That is one of the questions I hear most often. Can the grid even handle all of these electric vehicles? I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. What role the cars themselves might be able to do to stabilize the grid, not drain it potentially, but also the cost of our electric rates. Are they going to go up as a result?
Well, again, we're going to have to work very hard to make sure that utilities don't in some way upgrade the power grid. And by the way, you have different regions of the country that have different issues that impact the utility rates. TVA is federally subsidized and other regions don't have that. So that's something else that I am looking at. But the F-150 that I've talked about can actually, you can reverse charge. If we have a power outage, it can charge us. But one of the other things that can happen is that as utility companies can buy back electricity from you. It is much cheaper to charge your vehicle overnight than it is at daytime peakage. And utility companies are very much thinking out of the box. And if you charge your vehicle, they can then buy back some of the power that you have in your vehicle to help give them charging. So there are a lot of out of the box ideas and thinking that is going on as we look to the future, and staying at the forefront of being competitive is going to require that kind of thinking. Well,
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, you are clearly enmeshed in this issue, and I love your passion for EVs and your F-150 Lightning. I hope it comes in soon. I know there's quite a demand for them. So apparently Congress people don't get to run to the front of the line, apparently.
We don't, and I never would. So.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you. It's good being with you.
And next, we have a View from the Top segment with Chris Freites.
Hey, thank you, Joanne, and thank you to our sponsor, GM, for making this conversation possible. And joining me now is GM's Vice President of the EV ecosystem, Haas Sassani. Haas, welcome to Axios.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
So I am really excited to talk with you because I think a lot of people, myself included, are interested in buying electric vehicles, but then they think things like, oh, well, how am I going to charge it if I don't have a garage? And I guess I'm wondering, what are the barriers that you guys see to EV adoption, and how is GM working to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, well, Chris, good question. When we talk to customers, there's really three things that they cite as the reasons that are holding them back. And keeping in mind that we're seeing record EV sales right now across the industry, with closing in on 6% of total industry sales being EVs. So that's a huge milestone for the industry that we're enjoying our fair share of. But the adoption barriers right now are really range related. How far can the battery take me on a full charge? Charging related, and there's a lot in charging, frankly, home charging, public charging, and so forth. And then a lot of questions about the battery, separate from range, longevity, reliability of the battery, and so forth. So what are we doing on each of those? Well, first off, we're building vehicles with some of the longest ranges in the industry today. The Silverado EV that's coming out shortly here is going to be capable of range estimates that we've cited over 400 miles. And so we're working speedily on the range issue. The battery issue, that's an area where it really comes down to just demystifying and addressing some misperceptions customers have. In many cases, we expect, batteries are going to outlast the life of the vehicle, frankly. And then after that, there's a whole second use for the batteries as well in non-automotive applications. But on the issue of charging in particular, customers have a lot of questions about that. And when we educate customers and let them know that 90% of EV charging is being done in the home and at work today, there's a major breakthrough for them, right? It's that shift from thinking about it like a gas vehicle that you have to refuel at a station a couple times. And, of course, we also need to address the road trip anxiety that customers have, which we've also been investing in.
No, I think that is fascinating. 90% of the charging getting done at home and at work, and 400 miles. I mean, that's more than you can get on a tank of gas for many cars. So that's an impressive range. But when you talk about that charging infrastructure and that road trip, how do you ensure that it's accessible, that's reliable, and you kind of take away that, oh, I'm going to visit some family a couple states away?
Well, a lot of customers who are EV customers today fall back on the fact that they also have an ICE vehicle or an internal combustion vehicle in their household. But General Motors has, declared we expect to be the leaders by mid-decade in EV sales and want to have everybody in an EV. To wit, we've got the Equinox that we revealed recently, Chevy Equinox. That's like the heart of the market, the largest segment in North America, crossover segment. And so for us, having customers who have only one car in the household is an important customer group that we have to court, essentially. And the Equinox is going to do that on the vehicle side. So then, of course, the infrastructure needs to be there because those customers are not going to be able to fall back on an ICE vehicle for their road trip. So what are we doing? Well, a couple of weeks ago, we announced a partnership with Pilot Company that operates 750 or so service stations on interstate routes across the US and Canada. And we announced a partnership to get high-powered fast charging stations at 500 of their locations to start. That's about 2,000 chargers, all 350 kilowatt capable, so that the fastest, the vehicles on the road capable of fastest charging, Silverado, Hummer, and so forth, are able to take full advantage of that experience. And people can do a coast-to-coast road trip on the Ultium Charge 360 network.
Wow. And so what misconceptions do you see from consumers about how electric vehicles work, and how do you address those?
Well, a couple things. One of the things that comes up a lot, which is more of an altruistic question, is the grid ready for it, right? Can the grid take all of these additional EVs? We just recently announced the launch of our new line of business, GM Energy, which is all about underscoring that electric vehicles can actually be a solution for some of the challenges with the distribution of energy in the US, blackouts and that sort of thing. Moreover, people have misconceptions about the cost of an EV. So there's this perception, and it was true historically, that EVs had a premium versus their ICE counterparts. We see with the Equinox coming to market that we've essentially closed that gap. And when you factor in the total cost of ownership over 5 years, most people will come to learn that an EV is actually quite a sensible choice today, not 5 years from now, but today it's a more affordable choice if you factor in the total cost.
Yeah, so what role do dealers play, right? Because that's how most consumers interact with GM. How are they going to play a role in this EV transformation?
They're playing a really important role, Chris. We have 4,500 dealers across the US and Canada. If there's a community with 5,000 people in it, chances are there's a GM dealership in that town. And in fact, some 90% of the US population is within 10 miles of a GM dealer. So their ubiquity, I think, is fairly obvious. How we're working with our dealers is, in addition to the massive service footprint that they have, which stands apart from any of our competitors, we also announced a collaboration with our dealers to build out charging infrastructure across the country, including in a lot of these communities, thousands of communities that have zero charging infrastructure today. And through this dealer community charging program, we aim to deploy about 40,000 level 2 chargers, high-powered level 2 chargers across the US and Canada, which alone represents a 40% increase on today's charging infrastructure. So a massive effort, massive transformation. Charging infrastructure will be available for all and could only be done in partnership with our dealers.
So finally, Haas, we have just about a minute left, and I want to ask, how is GM preparing the company for this EV transformation? It's a really big change, right?
Well, Mary's leadership in the space, our chair and CEO's leadership in the space, and what she's, really set our mission as and our vision as, is really led a complete transformation culturally across the company. Of course, with a continued focus on our incredible ICE vehicles, but the whole company is getting behind this vision of a world with zero emissions and an all-electric future, Chris, and that includes, getting all of our employees in electric vehicles as quickly as we can so that they can experience it. Really having a whole company approach of how we innovate, how we enhance the customer experience, how we solve the infrastructure issues, the education engagement issues, how we bring costs down in the batteries and so forth. There really is a whole of company effort behind this transformation of our industry and of our company. And the GM Energy line of business that we just announced recently is just further evidence of how we see an immense opportunity that our employees are rallying behind.
All right, we are out of time and we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank our guest, Haas Hassani, GM's Vice President of the EV ecosystem. Haas, thank you so much for joining Axios.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure.
And now over to Joe Gian for your next segment.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Joe Guillen, Detroit reporter for Axios. Our final guest is the Chief Mobility Officer for the state of Michigan, Trevor Pawl, joining us from Detroit.
How you doing, Joe? Last but certainly not least.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for joining us. To kick us off, could you explain what a Chief Mobility Officer does and what your work entails in Detroit?
Yeah, a Chief Mobility Officer doesn't sleep a lot. There's always something to think about. So the best way to break it down is I'm usually working on one of two things. One would be policy innovation, so creating regulatory rights of way for the future of transportation, making sure legislators, people at the federal level, know everything that's happening in Michigan as it relates to the future of mobility. Then the other half of my job focuses on actually deploying cool, impactful technologies that impact Michigan residents in a positive way, make cities safer, greener, more productive, find new ways to uphold a person's dignity through allowing them to get to, say, a doctor's appointment or the grocery store in a seamless manner. And so we've rolled out a bunch of different really awesome initiatives, from an autonomous vehicle corridor between Detroit and Ann Arbor to a road that actually charges an electric vehicle as it's in motion, to a smart parking lab that focuses on the future of parking. So a lot of good things happening here in Michigan.
Sounds great. So in terms of electric vehicles and focusing on that, in your eyes, why do electric vehicles and the shift toward electrification matter to Detroit and its residents?
Well, I mean, it matters to the world. And I think because it matters to the world, it matters to Detroiters, it matters to Michiganders. I believe it was as of 2017, emissions from transportation passed that of built infrastructure. So houses, factories, places that don't necessarily move, right? And so the best opportunity we have to curb climate change is actually by focusing on the future of mobility, focusing on transportation. And then when you look at how electric vehicles are actually over the life of the vehicle cheaper to own. Like, you know, when you charge, you're paying $7 to $12 depending on your vehicle. So while, you know, the sticker price may be high right now, it's going to come down in a few years when, for instance, General Motors shifts its entire lineup to electric. And then when you look at charging infrastructure, we have a chance to remake our communities. We have a chance to sort of look at some of the inequities that, say, interstates created, that certain stops created along the interstate that may be diverted from main streets. We have a chance to look at our charging infrastructure and say, you know, how can we bring people together during the charging experience? And so we've done a couple of different things, from creating a signature electric vehicle route along Lake Michigan, sort of a reinvention of the American road trip, like a green version of Route 66. It's going to go around the lake, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana. And we believe that by creating this and putting charging stations in, you know, various tourism clusters, you can stop, see a community, and then be on your way and not emit, which is the main goal.
Here in Detroit, Detroiters are really known for their entrepreneurship. So one thing I was wondering is, you know, how can the industry capitalize on that spirit in terms of local research and development?
Yeah, I mean, going back to Henry Ford and the Dodge brothers, you're right. There's a rich heritage. You know, I look at some of the really awesome things happening right now, such as Michigan Central Station, which is a development that Ford is actually, Bill Ford personally is spearheading. It's a 1.2 million square foot district that will attract 5,000 high-tech talent workers to the city, not only to work, but to also live and play. And then some of the things we're doing, I think, with our grant programs, in particular, the Michigan Mobility Funding Platform, we're allowing some of the smartest founders all over the world to come and try their technology, to deploy their technology in our communities. And the government will actually cover the cost as long as the community wants it, as long as it's rolled out responsibly, as long as it can impact, it can help. You know, for instance, a transit agency provide more dynamic routes, make transit more affordable, roll out electrification and charging infrastructure in places maybe that wouldn't have been priority, but now because we are focused on it, that community becomes a priority. So that's a program that I think you know, startups from around the world can use to sort of prove their business and ultimately grow, scale, create jobs, get more VC. Michigan is a test bed. Michigan is a platform. You know, one quick example is we partnered with the National Park Service. In many ways, the National Park Service became popular as the automobile became popular, because you could get to these parks, you could explore them much easier than you could before. But now it's almost to a fault, where, you know, congestion, connectivity, sustainability are all issues. And so we partnered with them and our Michigan National Park assets to roll out new technologies. So if it works in a Michigan National Park, then it gets rolled out to, say, the Smokies, Yosemite, other places. That's an example of Michigan being a test bed. And that's why I think, you know, startups can really benefit from being here.
You've mentioned affordability and the growing infrastructure. And on the topic of access to EVs, the federal government is investing billions to build a network of charging stations across the country. What is the state doing to ensure that Detroiters have equitable access to that growing infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a really good and important question. So the state received $110 million of those, the federal infrastructure plan dollars that are planning to go towards charging. And we will be rolling those out along alternative fuel corridors, some of which will run through the Metro Detroit area. And the goal will be to put them in places that everyone can sort of leverage them, access them. But then also in places where, let's say, there are higher emissions, or maybe EV adoption seems further away. We've had really innovative private sector partnerships, for example, with Volta and Kroger, where we're installing chargers where maybe there won't be a return on them right away, but there are other ways to ensure that the business model around these chargers are sustainable through, say, advertising on you know, a screen on the charger. We think that, you know, as we roll out, you know, electrification across the state, you know, we're dealing with government structures that in many cases are 100 years old. which isn't going to work in, the 21st century. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that, we're pulling from different state departments. We're breaking down boundaries. We're working across the aisle. We're working with cities and counties as though they are part of the state to make sure that we get this right and we're not missing anyone along the way. And a lot of this needs to start in the city of Detroit because it's a population center. And frankly, there are a lot of high emitting areas, and there's transit needs. If we can get it right in Detroit, we can get it right in other places around the state, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, sticking on with Detroit, in particular, workforce training is a big issue here. What's happening to provide high-tech job opportunities around EVs to Detroit residents?
Yeah, so there was some recent research that took place that showed that there are about 300 Michigan companies that are at risk as we transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, and that's about 45,000 workers. So there are a lot of Detroiters that right now are working on world-class internal combustion engine vehicles, and we need to get them on a new career pathway where there's options as the industry transitions. And so one of the things that the state has done is roll out a Michigan Electric Vehicle Jobs Academy that will ultimately work with companies, understand where the job openings are, what the skill sets are, and then make sure Detroiters have an opportunity to go through the program and get a new job, launch a new career. And we believe this academy model not only can work with electrification or electric vehicles, it can also work, say, with charging infrastructure. If we did a charging infrastructure academy, or autonomous vehicles, or semiconductors. We think this is a new way of doing talent development, and we're really excited about it. And we think Detroiters are really going to benefit. Not to mention, there's another really cool program running out of Michigan Central in Corktown, which I talked about a few minutes ago, with Google, Grow with Google, Code Next. These are multiple programs for Detroiters that allow them to learn to code, learn basically the basic tenets, foundational stuff around software engineering that then will allow them to potentially walk down the hall, because that's what's cool about the district. Everyone's so close together, and find a new job at, say, Google or Ford or any cool tech startup that ends up locating in that space in that district.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have, Trevor. Really appreciate the conversation and for joining Axios today.
It's been great. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For the latest on the future of EVs, or to sign up for the Axios Local Detroit newsletter or Joanne's What's Next newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or on the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.